What happens when a broken girl meets a man with dark secrets? Celeste spent 19 years locked in an attic by her cruel Aunt Margaret, hidden from the world like a shameful secret. When gambling debts force Margaret to sell her own niece, mysterious, billionaire Sebastian Knight steps in with an offer that changes everything. But is he Celeste's savior, or just another captor with a golden cage? The mahogany doors of the penthouse office groaned open as Celeste stumbled inside, her bare feet silent against the cold marble floor. The city sprawled below through floor-to-ceiling windows, a glittering maze of lights that felt as foreign as another planet. She had never seen anything higher than her attic window. Sebastian Knight stood with his back to her, his tall frame silhouetted against the night sky. The black suit stretched across his broad shoulders, spoke of wealth she couldn't comprehend. But when he turned, his dark eyes held something she recognized immediately. The hollow ache of someone who had lost everything that mattered. "You're safe now," he said, his voice carrying the roughness of a man who rarely spoke gentle words. "Vincent Torres won't touch you." Celeste's fingers trembled as she pulled the thin gray shawl tighter around herself. "I don't understand," Margaret said. "I belong to someone now. I was sold." "You were." Sebastian's jaw tightened. "To me. I bought your freedom from a man who would have destroyed you." The words hit her like ice water. Another cage, another master. Her green eyes flashed with a defiance that surprised them both. "So you own me now?" Sebastian moved closer, and she caught the scent of expensive cologne mixed with something darker, more primal. "I don't own people, Celeste. I liberate them." "Then why do I feel more trapped than ever?" He stopped just inches away, close enough that she could see the scar that cut through his left eyebrow, close enough to notice how his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "'Cause freedom is terrifying when you've never had it." The penthouse felt suffocating despite its vastness. Celeste had traded 4 walls for a golden prison, and the man before her was both her savior and her captor. She could see the conflict in his eyes, the way he looked at her like she was something precious and dangerous at the same time. "What happens now?" she whispered. Sebastian's expression darkened. "Now you learn that the world is more brutal than anything Margaret ever did to you. And I learn whether saving you was the biggest mistake I've ever made." A knock echoed through the office, sharp and urgent. Sebastian's assistant appeared in the doorway, his face pale with panic. "Sir, we have a problem. Margaret Rivers is downstairs with the police. She's claiming you kidnapped her niece." The courtroom buzzed with whispers as Celeste sat beside Sebastian's lawyer, her hands folded in her lap like a prayer. 3 weeks had passed since that night in his penthouse. 3 weeks of legal battles and media scrutiny that painted her as either victim or accomplice, depending on which channel you watched. Margaret sat across the aisle in a black dress that screamed grieving guardian, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Her performance was flawless, and Celeste felt the familiar knot of helplessness in her stomach. "Your Honor," Margaret's lawyer began, "my client has cared for her troubled niece for 19 years. Miss Rivers suffers from severe psychological issues and was manipulated by Mr. Knight's wealth and promises." Sebastian's hand found Celeste's under the table, his fingers warm against her ice-cold skin. The touch sent electricity through her, a sensation she was still learning to navigate. In the weeks they'd spent together, she had discovered that Sebastian Knight was a man of contradictions. Ruthless in business, gentle with her broken pieces, commanding in every room he entered, yet somehow vulnerable in her presence. "That a lie," Celeste whispered, her voice barely audible. The judge called for order as Sebastian's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, we have evidence that Miss Rivers was held against her will, deprived of education, medical care, and basic human contact. Mr. Knight acted as a good Samaritan." But Margaret wasn't finished. She stood suddenly, tears streaming down her cheeks. She doesn't know what's real anymore. That man has filled her head with fantasies. "Les, darling, come home. I forgive you for this madness." The words were poison wrapped in honey, and Celeste felt 19 years of conditioning trying to pull her back into submission. But then Sebastian's thumb traced across her knuckles, anchoring her to the present. "No," Celeste said, louder this time. Da 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 da. I won't. Go back to that attic. The judge's gavel echoed like gunfire. Given Miss Rivers' age and the complex circumstances, I'm granting her legal independence. However, Mr. Knight, your methods were questionable. I'm placing Miss Rivers in temporary protective custody while social services conducts a full investigation. Sebastian's grip tightened. You can't take her. She needs stability, not another institution. She needs protection from men who think they can buy people, the judge replied sharply. As the bailiff approached, Celeste turned to Sebastian, her eyes wide with panic. Don't let them take me, please. Sebastian stood, his presence commanding. Even as his world crumbled, I'll fight this. I promise you, Celeste. I'll bring you home. What if home isn't with you? She whispered, the words cutting deeper than either expected. What if I'm just another project for you to fix? The question hung in the air like smoke as the bailiff led her away. Sebastian realized that saving Celeste had become something far more dangerous than liberation. It had become love. 2 days later, Celeste sat in a sterile group home, staring at the letter that had arrived that morning. The return address made her blood run cold. Vincent Torres, Federal Correctional Institution. Inside, in careful handwriting, were the words that would change everything. Ask your Prince Charming why he really wanted you. Ask him about the video. The visiting room smelled of disinfectant and broken dreams. Celeste sat across from Vincent. Torres, separated by bulletproof glass, her heart hammering against her ribs. The man who had tried to buy her looked older now, prison orange washing out his complexion, but his eyes still held that predatory gleam. You came, Vincent said into the phone, his smile cold as winter. I wondered if you would. What video? Celeste's voice was steady despite the tremor in her hands. What are you talking about? Vincent leaned back in his chair, savoring the moment like fine wine. Your Sebastian Knight isn't the saint he pretends to be, little bird. Before he swooped in to save you, he had me investigated. Thoroughly. The room felt smaller with each word. He watched footage of you, Celeste. Hours of it. Security cameras I had installed in that house, in that attic. We saw you at your most vulnerable, your most broken. And do you know what he said when he saw you crying? When he watched you pace that tiny room like a caged animal? Celeste's breath caught. Stop. He said you were perfect. Perfect for what he needed. A broken doll he could reshape into his ideal woman. Someone so grateful for rescue that she'd never question his methods, never leave him. The words hit her like physical blows. Every gentle touch, every patient conversation, every moment she'd thought was genuine affection, suddenly felt tainted. You're lying. Vincent's laugh was like broken glass. Am I? Then why hasn't he told you about the cameras? Why hasn't he mentioned that he studied you for months before making his move? Your precious savior is just another predator, little bird. The only difference is his cage is made of gold. That night, Celeste stood in Sebastian's penthouse living room, her back to the door as he entered. The space felt different now, larger and more oppressive, like a museum of lies. The social worker said you wanted to see me, Sebastian said quietly. Celeste, I'm so close to getting you out of that place. Just a few more days and you'll be home. Home. The word tasted bitter on her tongue. Tell me about the cameras. Sebastian. She felt rather than saw him freeze behind her. The silence stretched until it became its own answer. Celeste. Tell me about watching me. She turned slowly, and the devastation in her green eyes made him step back. Tell me about studying your perfect broken doll before you decided to collect her. Sebastian's face went white. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? Because Vincent Torres painted a very different picture of my rescue. Vincent Torres is a liar and a criminal. So are you. The words came out as a whisper, but they might as well have been screams. You watched me. You invaded the only privacy I had left, and then you used what you saw to manipulate me. Sebastian moved toward her, his hands outstretched like he was approaching a wounded animal. Yes, I had cameras installed. Yes, I watched you. But not for the reasons you think. Then tell me the real reasons, Sebastian. Why you really wanted me? He stopped just out of reach, his dark eyes burning with something between desperation and rage. "'Cause you reminded me of someone I failed to save. My sister died in a place like that attic, Celeste. Alone and afraid and convinced, no one cared enough to find her." The confession hung between them like a blade. "I watched you because I needed to know you were real. I wasn't projecting my guilt onto another lost cause. Yes, I fell in love with your strength, with the way you survived what would have destroyed anyone else. But I never, ever wanted to cage you." Celeste felt tears burning her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "How do I know any of this is true? How do I know you're not just telling me what I need to hear?" Sebastian pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling as he navigated to a video file. "Because I'm going to show you something I swore I'd never show another living soul." The screen filled with grainy security footage of a teenage girl in a basement room, and Celeste realized she was looking at Sebastian's sister in her final days. The girl was so thin, she was almost transparent, her eyes hollow with the knowledge of approaching death. "Her name was Elena," Sebastian whispered, "and I was too late to save her." Celeste looked from the screen to the man she thought she knew, seeing him clearly for the first time. Not a savior or a predator, but something more complex and infinitely more dangerous. A broken man trying to rewrite his greatest failure. "Get out," she said quietly. "Celeste, please, get out." The scream tore from her throat like a wounded animal, and Sebastian Knight, billionaire and titan of industry, obeyed without another word. Alone in the penthouse, surrounded by luxury, that felt like mockery. Celeste sank to her knees and finally understood the cruelest truth of all. Sometimes the people who save you are the ones who destroy you most completely. 6 months after walking away from Sebastian Knight, Celeste stood in the rain outside Margaret's funeral, watching from a distance as Jasmine wept over the casket. The cancer had been swift and merciless, and despite everything, Celeste felt an unexpected hollow ache in her chest. She had built a life for herself with the settlement money from Sebastian's legal team. A small apartment across town, a job at a local library, night classes at community college. It was quiet and simple in hers. But some nights, she still woke reaching for warmth that wasn't there. Missing conversations with the only person who had ever seen her as more than a victim or a burden. "She asked for you at the end." Celeste turned to find Jasmine approaching, mascara streaking down her cheeks like black tears. Up close, Margaret's golden daughter looked fragile and lost, her perfect facade cracking at the edges. "I don't believe that," Celeste replied quietly. She did. She kept saying your name over and over. It's like she was trying to remember something important. Jasmine wiped her nose with a soggy tissue. "I found this in her things." She held out a manila envelope, thick with papers and photographs. Celeste's name was written across the front in Margaret's careful handwriting. "I should hate you," Jasmine continued. "Mother always said you were cursed, that you brought misfortune to our family. But seeing you now, you just look like me, sad and alone." Celeste took the envelope with trembling fingers. "What's in here?" "The truth, I think, or at least Margaret's version of it." Jasmine turned to go, then paused. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry for all of it." That night, Celeste spread the contents of the envelope across her kitchen table. Birth certificates, medical records, legal documents, and dozens of photographs she had never seen. Her mother's face smiled back at her from yellowed snapshots. Beautiful and radiant, and nothing like the shameful creature Margaret had described. But it was the letter dated 3 days before Margaret's death that stopped her cold. "Celeste, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and perhaps that's for the best. I have carried the weight of my lies for 20 years, and I'm tired of the burden. Your mother was not weak. She was brave and kind and loved you more than life itself. When she died in childbirth, she made me promise to care for you, to give you the family she couldn't. Instead, I locked you away because I was afraid. Afraid that if people saw how much you looked like her, they would remember what your father took from all of us. Your father was my husband first, Celeste. Margaret's husband, before he charmed your mother and abandoned you both. You are not cursed. You are not shameful. You are the daughter of the only woman who ever truly loved him, and I hated you for that. I'm sorry. I'm so terribly sorry. The house is yours now. Do with it what you will." Margaret, the papers scattered, as Celeste's hands shook. 20 years of lies unraveling in a few paragraphs. She wasn't the daughter of a monster. She was the daughter of a woman who had loved and lost everything. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Meet me at the old house. Come alone." Vincent Torres. Celeste's blood turned to ice. Vincent Torres was supposed to be in federal prison for another decade. How was he texting her? He freed, but as she stared at the photographs of her mother, at the life that had been stolen from both of them, Celeste realized she was tired of running from the truth. Tired of being afraid, she grabbed her keys and drove through the rain toward the house that had been her prison. Unaware that Sebastian Knight was following at a distance, his own phone buzzing with alerts from the security team he'd secretly assigned to protect her. The house loomed against the stormy sky like a monument to old pain. Every window was dark except one, the attic where she had spent 19 years of her life. Light flickered behind the glass, and Celeste knew with cold certainty that Vincent Torres was waiting for her in the place where her nightmare had begun. She climbed the familiar wooden stairs, each creak a memory of Margaret's footsteps, each shadow holding echoes of her captivity. The door to the attic stood open for the first time in her memory, and beyond it sat Vincent Torres, very much not in prison, holding a gun pointed directly at her heart. "Hello, little bird," he said with that same predatory smile. "We have so much to discuss." Behind him, tied to the support beam where her bed used to be, was Sebastian Knight. Blood trickling from a cut above his eye, his dark gaze fixed on her with desperate intensity. "Celeste, run," he whispered through split lips. Vincent's laugh filled the small space like poison. "Well, she's not going anywhere, not until she helps me collect what I'm owed." "You see, little bird," Vincent continued, his gun steady in his grip, "our mutual friend here destroyed my entire operation. Every casino, every business, every source of income I had built over 30 years, gone because he decided to play white knight." Celeste's eyes never left Sebastian's face. Even bloodied and bound, he was watching her with that protective intensity she had tried so hard to forget. "How are you free? You were sentenced to 20 years. Appeals are wonderful things when you have the right connections.
Oh, and when you
Have leverage." Vincent gestured toward Sebastian with his free hand. "Mr. Knight here has been very cooperative since I took him 3 days ago. Amazing how quickly a man will transfer funds when his security team finds photos of you slipped under their doors." The realization hit Celeste like a physical blow. Sebastian hadn't moved on after she left. He had been protecting her from the shadows, and it had cost him everything. "What do you want from me?" she asked, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "Simple. You're going to call Knight Industries and authorize the transfer of another $50 million to my offshore accounts. Consider it payment for all the trouble you've caused." "Can't do that. I don't have access to his accounts." Vincent's smile widened. "But you will, because if you don't, I'm going to put a bullet in his head and make you watch. To burn this house down around you, and everyone will think it was a tragic accident." Poor, broken girl couldn't handle the grief of losing her aunt. Sebastian struggled against his restraints, his voice rough with desperation. "Celeste, don't do it. Don't let him win." But Celeste was no longer the frightened girl who had cowered. In this attic, 6 months of freedom had taught her something Margaret never could. Sometimes love means making impossible choices. "I'll do it," she said quietly. "But I want to know why Sebastian was really following me. Why he never stopped watching over me, even after I told him to leave." Vincent shrugged. "Ask him yourself. You have 5 minutes while I set up the call." As Vincent moved toward the window to check his escape route, Celeste knelt beside Sebastian. Up close, she could see the fear in his eyes. Not for himself, but for her. "You never stopped," she whispered, her fingers working at the ropes around his wrists. "I couldn't. I tried, but I couldn't stop loving you, even when you hated me for it." His voice was barely audible. "I'm sorry, Celeste, for the cameras, for the lies, for failing you, just like I failed Elena." "You didn't fail anyone." The ropes gave way, just as Vincent turned back toward them. "You saved me from more than just Margaret's attic. You saved me from believing I was worthless." "How touching," Vincent sneered, raising the gun again. "Up, make the call." Celeste stood slowly, her hand finding the heavy brass candlestick that had sat on the attic windowsill for as long as she could remember. In one fluid motion, she spun and brought it down across Vincent's skull with every ounce of strength in her body. Vincent crumpled to the floor, the gun skittering across the wooden boards. Sebastian lunged forward and secured the weapon as Celeste sank to her knees, shaking with adrenaline and something that felt dangerously like triumph. "It's over," Sebastian said, pulling out his phone to call the police. "Can't hurt anyone ever again." But Celeste was staring at the unconscious man at her feet, thinking of all the lives he had destroyed, all the families he had torn apart with his greed and violence. "No," she said quietly. "It's not over until we make sure he can never do this again." Sebastian followed her gaze and understood. They had a choice: turn Vincent over to a justice system that had already failed once, or ensure he disappeared permanently. It would be easy. A man like Vincent Torres had plenty of enemies who would be happy to handle the problem. "Celeste, we can't. We're not like him." She turned to look at Sebastian, and he saw something new in her green eyes. Not the broken victim he had rescued or the angry woman who had walked away, but someone who had finally learned to fight back. "Aren't we? You destroyed his empire to save me. I just tried to kill him to save you. Maybe the only difference between us and him is who we're willing to protect." The sound of sirens echoed in the distance, growing closer. They had run out of time to make the harder choice, but as Vincent Torres was loaded into an ambulance under police guard, Celeste realized she had found something more valuable than revenge. She had found herself. 3 months later, Celeste stood in the garden of the house that had once been her prison. She had torn down the attic walls, letting sunlight flood into spaces that had known only darkness. The building would become a shelter for women escaping domestic violence. Funded by Sebastian's guilt and her determination to transform pain into purpose, Sebastian approached from the renovated kitchen, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. They had been meeting like this every day for weeks, slowly rebuilding trust with careful conversations and patient honesty. It wasn't romance, not yet, but it was real in a way their first desperate connection had never been. "Vincent's lawyer called," Sebastian said, handing her the steaming mug. "He's pleading guilty to avoid trial. 25 to life." Celeste nodded, watching the steam rise from her coffee like ghosts of old pain finally dissipating. "Good. No one else will have to be afraid of him." They stood in comfortable silence. 2 broken people who had learned that healing wasn't about forgetting the past but transforming it into something meaningful. The girl who had been sold like property was gone. In her place stood a woman who understood that the strongest chains were the ones we learned to break ourselves. "I love you," Sebastian said quietly. "Not the victim I thought I was saving, not the project I thought I could fix. You. Exactly as you are, exactly as you're becoming." Celeste turned to face him, seeing not her savior or her captor, but simply the man who had been brave enough to stand in the wreckage of their mistakes and help her build something new from the ashes. "I love you too," she replied, "enough to forgive us both for who we used to be." The sun set behind them as they walked back toward the house that was no longer a prison but a promise. They had learned the hardest lesson of all, that freedom isn't something given or taken away, it's something you create. One choice at a time, one day at a time, one act of courage at a time, and sometimes, if you're very lucky, you don't have to create it alone. The end.